hours.
Okay.
I don't think anyone else knows we're on.
That's okay. That's okay.
I think the key thing would be to...
All right. Let's start.
Okay.
Do you want to start? You want me to start?
You should start. I'll dump in photos as you get going.
Okay.
Hi, whoever the two people are.
Hi. So it's Patrick and Chelsea from the Poetry Vlog.
Uh-huh.
Maybe you've seen our videos, maybe not. If this is your first time,
Don't tell us if you haven't.
welcome. So this is actually the first time I've done a live stream with you.
This is my second time doing a live stream,
Okay.
but my first time doing one where it wasn't for a class.
Oh, this is honestly my first live stream
Yeah.
ever. So I'm really nervous. But let's talk. What are we talking about today? We're talking about camp. Last January we were in Chicago. We recorded an
I'll
episode
provide a little
about camp. We did an episode about D.A. Powell, the poet, and his relationship to disco music, and specifically how camp played into that disco aesthetic and also into D.A. Powell's poetics.
Yeah.
And it was a ton of fun. Not simply because we recorded it while laying in bed together, but it was just...
That sounded so creepy.
Now you want to go to YouTube and watch the video, don't you? Now you're like, wait a minute, dude, are they really in bed together? So anyway, go watch the video.
Spoiler alert, we are both very much not into each other's particular gender sexuality matrix. There it is. I'm sure we just
Now she's
confuse
talking about
everybody
my
else.
matrix. So
some background on Patrick and I. Patrick's a modernist. I'm a postmodernist. You don't have to be a cultural studies person to know what that means. You can just say Gertrude Stein or The Matrix.
Is that how we line up? Okay.
All
So anyway, we did this awesome episode about camp. If you haven't seen it yet, please go watch it. It's worth your time. And then the Met Gala, which was last week, their theme this year was camp. And it was like, we have to do something about this. We have to respond in some way. As it turns out, the entire internet has already responded. It's like the Gala theme that launched 1,000 think pieces about what is or is not camp.
You gotta move my way.
So I figure what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about what is or is not camp by talking about what happened on the red carpet at the Met Gala. So we'll talk about a few of the outfits. I think we picked out 4 or 5 that we were really interested in, or that only one of us was interested in. And I think that's where things will get really, really spicy on this live broadcast. So we'll use these outfits to talk about what is camp, what isn't camp, why is camp so hard to define, maybe a little bit about what its history is and how, history is constantly in flux and constantly under contestation, like whose history and who's telling this history is constantly evolving.
Yeah.
So the history of camp is constantly evolving. And this Met Gala theme brought a lot of that into focus. Mm-hmm. I don't think we have any answers, but we might have some fun. So,
I agree.
Okay.
For you, we have one person with us, your involvement. And in case anybody retroactively goes through and watches this, you can leave comments or ask questions in the comment feed below. That's one of the benefits of doing live. So
we look great on both cameras, so we're good.
I did my best Britney Spears.
Me too. Okay.
Start us off.
Who's first? Who are we talking about first? Do you want to talk about Harry Styles first?
Yes, that was our first big debate, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was the first one because we were like, oh, let's pick like a handful of people to talk about. And I was like, I want to do Harry Styles. And Chelsea was immediately like,
why?
But is it camp? So Harry Styles is wearing a black lace jumpsuit from Gucci with a single pearl earring, a sort of dangly pearl earring. Uh-huh. Check out the shoes. The shoes got a little bit of a heel on them, that patent leather with the heel. So very, I don't know, how would you describe this?
Well,
just how would you describe it?
I'm still not totally sold.
You don't have to describe it as camp. Just how would you describe it?
Yeah. I would say this is very much like a 1990s men's ice skating costume that you would wear if you were going to do Black Swan before Johnny Weir made the actual men's Black Swan outfit work.
Okay, kindly tell me in what world 1990s men's figure skating is not camp.
It is camp, but to be clear, to me, after a while, when you're in the ice skating world, it's just expected. It's no longer like an orientation. It'd almost be like weird for a male ice skater to show up in a more like traditionally masculine outfit.
So if it's not lacy and frilly, then it's
it'd
weird.
be odd. Plus, the bib is part of that, right?
Yeah.
Because it covers up like the chest hair. So usually if the chest hair shows, it's campier.
Interesting.
Because that's like a statement and kind of risque. Whereas like that bib is used to kind of like still allow men to wear that kind of billowy, like see-through mesh sleeve situation without being too risque.
Isn't that funny how chest hair can be camp and like digressive in one setting, but then like completely
blasé
in another. How funny. Well, I guess that gets to like what.
And then those are shoes I would wear to teach in if I could afford them.
I don't know if I would teach in those shoes. But
you wouldn't, because they're like more effeminate.
Okay, so
you sold me on the pearl earring though, so explain that.
Okay, well, I want to pause on this idea that you were like, well, if a man shows up to skate like this, like he's just following the rules. This is what men skate in. And it's that sense of following the rules that makes it not camp, it seems like. So there has to be something transgressive in order for it to be camp. Certainly like transgression doesn't equal camp, but are we safe in saying that like you need to break some sort of rule in order to be camp? Okay. So that's a really good starting point. It's like you have to break a rule. Yeah. And I think one rule is just like norms, what's expected. When it comes to masculinity on the red carpet, I would say that this is pretty unexpected, especially for a straight pop star like Harry Styles, who got his fame in one direction and has gone on his own. And what sets up his solo work apart from his work in One Direction is it is far more like rock oriented. It's a lot heavier and it's a lot more guitar based. Okay. And it's a lot more masculine in many ways. And so to show up in sheer lace and a single pearl earring sort of pushes against that image in a surprising way, in a controlled and safe way, because this is the Met Gala. This is where it's expected to go over the top. So that raises the question, is it possible to be camp at all?
At the Met Gala.
At the Met Gala in which the theme is camp. Because if one of the tenets of camp is to break a rule.
Or to be like out of place.
To be out of place, absolutely. And the dress code is camp, then like, is it even possible to be camp on this red carpet? I bring this example up because I think this is a really good indicator of like some of the histories of camp and where it came from in the late 19th century and in a British arts movement that has come to be known as decadence, the Decadence Movement, or the aestheticist movement and aestheticism. And this is really closely related to like pre-Raphaelite paintings. So those Rossetti paintings with the women with like the great big flowy hair and like everything sort of over the top and extra curvy and extra colorful. It's that sense of being extra aesthetic, almost Rococo, almost Baroque, very over the top. Also very Gothic in a lot of ways. The fact that it's black lace, I think, is really important. One, we can't bring up images, and that's such a bummer. But I think one sort of visual analog that we have here is, is the work of Aubrey Beardsley.
And I would add, for folks that are tuning in and they're like, wait, is this going to be another whitewashed history of camp? We are not staying in a white Eurocentric history of camp. In fact, one of the reasons it helped for us to talk together about this is that if you Google camp right now, you find black only history or white only history, and neither is fully accurate. Yeah. Like it's a lot more complex than that because camp is an orientation towards like social formation of any variety. Yeah. Right. So we're interested in kind of troubling either like a whitewashed history of camp, which is problematic for extraordinarily obvious reasons, but also histories of camp that say, well, only black queer movements have had camp, because neither is accurate. Yeah. Like this is a very complicated aesthetic turn, and both histories need full attention. Yeah. All right.
So Aubrey Beardsley did these really famous illustrations for Oscar Wilde's version of Salome, and there are these wonderful black and white images where the shapes are extra curvy, high contrast, really extravagant, and very, very Gothic, very scary. So the image known as the climax shows Salome kissing the head of John the Baptist. And it's all black and white. A sort of laciness runs through this image that I think we can really see echoing in Harry Styles' outfit. Also worth noting,
the John the Baptist, not John the Baptist, the the guy that looks like Jesus.
The guy that Brand. It wasn't Russell Brand. It was the guy from 30 Seconds to Mars who has that. Jared Leto.
Thank you.
Jared Leto showed up with his own head.
Right.
On a
Which was
tray.
like an almost explicit reference.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like, oh, I'm referring to like this history of camp. And so in that history, Oscar Wilde is taking this Bible story and cranking up the salacious details.
Yeah.
That we have the temptress Salome calling for the head of John the Baptist.
Yeah.
And so he's really cranking up the raunchiness and the tastelessness of this Bible story.
Yeah.
And so that gets to, I think, a super important part of camp that I'm going to add to, like, camp has to break a rule. And this other thing about camp that I want to note is, like, camp is not about the cultural object. It's about the orientation to that cultural object. It's about taking your relationship to the culture at large and skewing it and making it weird. Yeah. So taking the relationship between a white British man and a Bible story, okay, yeah, there's not a lot of danger there, but to crank up the salaciousness and the raunchiness and the queerness of it, that turns it into camp.
Take it from being something like a reverent object that you have to approach with reverence. It suddenly criticizes it as an object and instead makes it about the approach and the approach being irreverent. Yeah. Right. So it's usually very offensive. Yeah. To like the dominant cultural norms. Yeah. But what's weird about it, so I'm good that we started with these ones because they're such explicit references to some like particular histories of camp, right? Is that those same cultural like things that used to be so dangerous to do are in some ways the norm now, right? So like Cara Delevingne goes to so many like variations of the Met Gala and tuxedos and top hats all the time. That would have been considered camp quite, not too long ago for someone who's otherwise so like femme queer or even femme cis straight presenting in some ways. Oh yeah, right?
Post Victor Victoria, that's like no longer a transgressive outfit choice. Like that's a very tried and true outfit choice at this point.
Exactly. What was the next one you wanted to talk about?
So the next one, I think, so we've done Harry Styles. Do you want to do Billy Porter now?
Can we?
Yeah, let's do Billy Porter.
All right. Billy Porter has actually been my second favorite of the day. So Billy Porter.
You start. He's your favorite.
Well, I'm going to start the opposite way that you start with things because I'm so different from you. And for me, the first thing that struck me when I saw the images of the Billy Porter one was this sort of like excessive opulence and tackiness being absorbed into sort of a deifying object, but then undoing it at the same time. So like it just went from like, it went gaudy, all out gold, super like carried on a platter by like servants to like kind of holding out the wings in all gold of like the sun god reference, right? And like you said, Diana Ross, Mahogany song. So taking these different, thank you. That's why I was like, what am I missing? Thank you. Thank you. But what I loved about it is that it was actually the mask effect and the sort of studied seriousness of it, while it was something you have to have an affective response to. And also the way that like it was oriented, like, so if you look at the images of it, people make way. You know what I mean? So there's this sort of like self-reverence happening, but then you can't take it too seriously when someone then opens their arms up and they create a golden wing. Oh yeah, and the fact that it's sort of like you come in as this like gold icon, this object of worship. But it's not gold, it's beads and sequins and glitter. Exactly. Thank you. That's a really necessary. It has to be gaudy. Yeah. It has to be gaudy. It has to be cheap. Yes. Like that's the whole point. If he came in wearing gold, that would be a whole nother story. But the fact that he's wearing like gold organza is like right. Because the whole thing about camp is like you're also kind of passing, but kind of nodding to the fact that you don't. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like you can't actually buy like the Dolce and Gabbana. It has to be something that you play up as Dolce and Gabbana. Like you got it like Goodwill or a thrift store. Yeah. So is it possible for Harry Styles to be camp when he's wearing Gucci? I don't know. Like it's Gucci. But Billy Porter's outfit was put together by
this sort of stylist collective called the Blondes, and it's not just like one piece by one designer that you can sort of attach a label and a brand to, but it's sort of a look that's been really fully conceptualized and fully performed.
Yes.
You know, this is not just something you wear. This is like a persona that you adopt.
Which is part of camp, because it is part of ball culture, both like homosexual in the early 1900s, white included, we're going to get there, right? Ball culture all the way up through like the more relevant today famous examples, right? Of like Paris is Burning ball culture, and then Pose FX and RuPaul's Drag Race. And the whole point is that you don't just wear the outfit, you embody the outfit and pass as that type of persona in the world, right? Like, and it could be anything from like, I'm going to pass as like middle-class housewife. And that can be camp, right? And part of what pulls this together is, first of all, things I didn't know the style nod, so that makes sense. So it's also refusing to do the sort of branding thing that happened here in camp that doesn't, that's a question. Can it work then if it's used, co-opted like that? Because then you're no longer, you're still giving them the money and the benefit, and like, it doesn't make sense. It's not like a full subversion, but also that it was embodied and performed throughout the entire walk. Like the pose with the huge wings, the being carried on the chariot, that is more like camp.
It makes me think, you know, like that old saying, money can't buy taste. But I have to wonder, like, money can't buy tastelessness.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think you can buy your way into being tasteless any more than you can buy your way into having taste.
Yeah.
So, like, but that's not to say that like there wasn't a great deal of money spent on this look,
right?
But there is something a little bit subversive.
But it is a commentary on the fact that like traditionally camp performance was you collected different pieces of things.
You shoplifted different pieces. Like that's what's super important. Is like maybe you wore that Versace dress on the floor, but if you did, you stole it. And so I think there's like another element of, there's like an anti-capitalist element to it, but there's
students
like,
usually have a hard time with, because if you show Paris is Burning, oftentimes students' responses are like, oh, but it's just like celebrating like upper class capitalism. Like all they want to do is be like, and they'll say like, my dream is to be a rich white lady who does nothing and wears her furs all day, you know, and so on. But the whole point is that it's taking the idea that we can somehow reach that in like a real way and claiming it as a performance of self that could be performed variously without reasserting that kind of hierarchy of actual money.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like, what would it mean to have like an income below $10,000 a year and still get to lay around in your furs?
Okay.
You know what I mean?
So here's what we figured out. Like camp has to break a rule. It has to break rules. Camp is not an object, it's an orientation to that object. So it's not a look, it's a sensibility. And then also, can we say camp has to be cheap? Yeah, I think
we got to say it. We have to say it.
I think we have to say it.
Camp has to be cheap, and the Met Gala is not cheap.
Yeah. So, am I willing to go all the way? Yes, I am. I'm willing to say that camp has to be cheap.
Yeah.
So I think when I think camp, I can't help but think of like John Waters movies, and it's like ultra low budget movies. It's like zero budget, sort of just like you can sort of like see the boom mic every once in a while because they don't have the film to reshoot it. Like it has to be cheap. It has to be thrown together. Yeah. And the cracks have to show a little bit. They have to show a little bit, but then realness in that sense, which now has been actually co-opted, I think, by a lot of like more normative spaces a little bit. Because the whole point of realness is that you've kind of glued in those cracks just enough that you could pass. But it's the fact that you're passing so well that makes the cracks show so much. Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah. It's like a weird, I think that's why it's such a threshold concept for folks, because it's the opposite of how we're expected to approach fashion. You know? Let's move on to another look. Okay. Your pick now. Okay, do you want to do, we got two left. We got Janelle Monáe. That's my favorite. So let's save Janelle Monáe for the last, because I think this is where we're going to have some discussion. This is Dakota Johnson. I'm just convinced that you just weren't raised watching ice skating enough. That's my theory. So it's like, I'm convinced that if we're going to talk about camp as an orientation, like you have to be aware of like, your subject position and the object's position, and like you and I are
Yeah.
just like in two different positions.
Exactly.
I think like there are the obvious differences, and then there are the less obvious differences, like how I never grew up ice skating and how you don't like horror movies.
Yeah, exactly.
So maybe like that's where this distinction
yeah.
is coming from. So Dakota Johnson is also wearing Gucci, and she's wearing a flowy, what would you call this? Would you call this magenta?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah. This flowy sequined magenta gown with a silver crown on top of it, and then in the middle of this gown
I'll type her name in while you're talking.
Oh, I already did.
Oh, sorry.
Is a sequined red heart that's dripping sequined blood down the front of this dress.
Mm-hmm.
So this calls to mind two things. First, and this relates to other stuff that we've already talked about, that's sort of like bleeding heart of the Virgin Mother.
Mm-hmm.
So we have this like Virgin Mary vibe going on here, but it's rendered in sequins, and it's red on magenta, which is like the tackiest color scheme I can imagine.
Mm-hmm.
Like outside of teal and tangerine, I think magenta and red is the tackiest.
Yeah.
Like thought long and hard, like what is the tackiest color scheme? It's teal and tangerine. That might be a hot take, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But so anyway, we have this super tacky color scheme that's like coming into contact with this religious iconography. So I think that camps it. Can camp be a verb? I think there needs to be some sort of,
maybe that's the problem. Maybe it has to stop being a noun now that it's been taken on as a noun.
Yeah, because
you know what I mean?
Camp isn't something
kind of like queer, like it turned into you have to queer something to help get it out of that space of just like pure object.
Yeah. Camp isn't something that you either have or don't have. Camp is something you either do or don't do.
Yeah.
And you can't perceive that camping if you aren't sort of like in a similar sort of position, or at least can't sympathize with the position of the person doing the camping.
Yeah.
So here we have this gown camping religious iconography. We also have it nodding to Dakota Johnson's role in Suspiria, which came out last year. So she played this young American dancer named Susie, who moves from the American Midwest to Berlin, Germany, to dance in this contemporary dance company. But it turns out that the dance company is actually a coven of witches, and they're looking for like the witch mother to rule the witch coven. And it turns out that Dakota Johnson's character is the mother Suspiriorum. Oh, spoiler alert. Anyway, and
I was really gonna watch that.
I know you were like, but is she the mother? Like, she is. And in the closing scene, she opens her chest cavity and sort of like exposes her beating heart, and all the sort of lamentations of the other dancers sort of enter into her. So it's weirdly sexual in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But it's also like it's gross. It's totally gross. But it's so over the top that you almost can't be grossed out by it. It's not far from the image that we're looking at now with the sequined red heart on the magenta gown, because it's not realistic, and so it doesn't have that sort of disgust vibe. No, it does have a disgust to it, but it's a safe kind of disgust. I don't know. I want to introduce the idea of disgust and the gross into our conversation about camp, because I think disgust is a big part of this. Yeah. So,
because like the Rocky Horror Picture Show is a famous example, partly because it sort of does pick at that slight aversion that you're going to have, right? Like there's a certain like grossness to like the sort of damp, steamy, skin on skin, weird, uncomfortable outfit. Like there is like a sort of like disgustingness to it.
Yeah.
Which I don't go full into horror because I have a straight up phobia of looking at like open skin. It's not like a small thing.
Yeah.
But like I think that if I could look at that, you have to talk about like almost faux horror as part of the camp genre.
Yeah. And I mentioned John Waters, but John Waters' films, especially his early ones like Pink Flamingos and Female Trouble, are super famous for being disgusting. If you've ever seen them, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you haven't and you don't know what I'm talking about, like now's not the time to go over the sort of disgusting things that happen in these films. But like They are disgusting. So I wonder, like, that's something that I want to introduce into this conversation, because I feel like that hasn't been really talked about in these conversations surrounding camp. It's like grossness.
Yeah.
We've talked about tackiness and cheapness, but there has to be a sort of like, people need to want to like turn away, but then also at the same time, like, not turn away. It has to have that creep factor where there's an aversion, but also an attraction to the fact that you're being that you're experiencing that aversion.
Yeah.
So I don't know, can you think of any other examples where that element of disgust comes into camp?
I feel like this is an orientation issue again too.
Okay.
Right? Because like, to me, like, disgust is in the sort of we just have different things we find disgusting.
Totally.
You know, like so for instance, part of why I liked the sun god reference and all of the kind of tacky gold is there is a sort of disgustingness to tons and tons of dripping tacky gold.
Yeah.
Right? Like, there is a sort of grossness to it, or like looking like you're covered in scales. You know? Whereas for this, I'm like, oh, she still looks really pretty in it. And like, ice skating costumes historically have like bad color combinations to make a point. So part of me is just like, oh yeah, she still found a way to look cute.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean?
And here
and
again.
So for me, it's like, where is that, like, do you look good like that? Or are you like leaning into it and exaggerating it?
Yeah.
So whereas Harry Styles, I will say, you could argue, was pushing against what makes him traditionally attractive to his fan base. So there I could buy it more. Right? Because his traditional fan base was probably like, oh, you know, because he has like a more conservative, heteronormative fan base. And so coming in with like the pearl earring to reference the painting and wearing heels, like that's a little bit more like, might initiate that sense of disgust for a more homophobic person.
Yeah. Because
whereas with her, I'm like, I don't get any disgust out of this. I'm like, no, this is a very flattering color on her. The red is perfectly highlighted by the blush in her cheeks. They made sure her hair looked unstyled, but it's definitely styled.
Yeah.
She's still wearing a crown. The cut of the dress is flattering on everyone except a pregnant lady.
But like, she's getting to disgust through the side door, because she's referencing her scene in the film. Right. And we could also talk about Jared Leto and his head. Like, that's disgusting in its way. Yeah. But I think you really nailed something when you talked about how, like, disgust is relative. Yeah. And what's disgusting to one person is not going to be disgusting at all. And I think, so, okay, you want to talk about,
right,
like,
to us, like, Harry Styles is obviously not disgusting because we're queer. So we're like, oh, wonderful. Like, so, like, you know, there's like immediate attraction without the disgust element. Whereas for someone who maybe is a little bit more like put off by gender nonconformity, that would be more like visceral disgust with an unspoken desire. Yeah.
Attraction. So crossing those boundaries between male and female, like, that will be disgusting to some. And there are some wonderful queens who, like, highlight the fact that there's a local queen here in Seattle who goes by Baby Girl, and Baby Girl is so obviously like an overweight hairy dude in a dress that is always too small, and like it's hard to talk about it because the sort of
they don't
tension
go into pure she, and that's their whole shtick. Yeah, and
so it creates this sense of like,
which for some people really messes with, I'm going to fix our focus.
Oh, totally,
really messes with drag, because some people go to a drag show expecting to see femininity parodied.
Oh, yeah.
So when you like parody it, but then also parody masculinity.
Oh, yeah.
That's disgusting to a lot of people that show up.
In season 6 of RuPaul's Drag Race, when Milk did that final runway look with a beard, she wore a beard, and people freaked out. They were like, oh God, you can't wear a beard. You're a drag queen. And then I think it was the very next season, the runway look, they all had to wear beards. Yeah. So it's like, okay, this is no longer disgusting.
That's the other piece of camp. It always becomes a dominant cultural theme eventually. Like, has there ever been a camp movement that didn't have a moment where it became popularized?
Oh yeah, that's a good question.
You know,
that's a good question.
Which actually could bring us to the Lena Waithe and the Janelle Monáe outfit.
Okay, but can I introduce this? Can I introduce this new rule of camp has to be gross? Yeah. Okay, so what do we have? It has to
break rules.
It has to break rules.
Be stolen.
It has to. So it has to break rules. It's not
stolen. That was me being cheap.
So and I love the new way of putting it. It's not a noun. It's a verb. So it has to break rules. It's not a noun. It's a verb. It has to be cheap. Yeah. It has to be gross. All right. I like where we're at so far.
Gross desires.
Yeah, gross
Yeah.
desires. All right. So
All
what
right.
else?
Janelle Monáe.
Are we doing? Okay. Did you want to do Lena Waithe?
We will. I think we should do that one last because
Okay.
that's going to be more critique at that point then.
All right. So
All
we're getting into the looks you chose.
We're going to go into where we might start arguing. So if you've ever wondered if we have disagreements, you'll probably witness it on camera.
Okay.
But we're not conflict avoidance, so that's okay.
So here we have Janelle Monáe.
And no picture captures it because
it's animatronic.
It's animatronic, good. Janelle Monáe.
It's got a blinking eye. Do you know who designed this?
No.
This is Christian Siriano.
Okay.
Winner of season 1? Was this season 1? No, this couldn't have been season 1. This must have been season 3. Season 3? Winner of a season of Project Runway, an early season. He was 23 when he won, so definitely the youngest person to win it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so designed, I think it bears sort of emphasizing, designed by a reality TV star as much as a fashion designer.
Cheap. People see reality TV as cheap. And it's an exaggerated metaphor. I'm a woman who wears many hats. It's like the joke she made on Instagram about it.
Okay.
And I think that's part of camp as well. It's taking this like metaphorized like identity trope and then dragging it out. So like you could go in and do like in ball culture like plumber, right? Or like you could do like cheap slut.
Or the military performance.
Yeah. Military is a really big one. And I think that's part of what makes this like it has to be a little bit cheesy.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like there has to be a sort of like you get this, but you also get it so much that you don't get it. There's kind of like that just like off thing about it, right? Because you can be a woman who wears many hats and you have like a winking boob.
Okay,
right?
We've gone so far out of focus here.
Oh, wow. But there is this sort of, and in order to wear it, she had to walk like completely, she had to be really careful.
Yeah.
So she couldn't posture herself. Like it's very much like wearing like the Mrs. Potts kind of outfits.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? There's this like, this sort of constant being in the mode. Which again, I think goes similar to why I liked the Sun God one, where it's not just the outfit and what it nods to per se, as like you have to fully embody it to wear it.
Oh yeah, you can't wear camp. You have to
and she posted the video of the person that made the hat.
Oh.
So you see it, and it's just like in a basic studio, someone at home. You would never guess it had anything to do with the attire. So it's also like this person made this, and it's handmade, it's stitched together, even though it looks very much like something you could only spend like $10,000 on in a special designer store to wear to like a religious wedding in Britain or something. You know what I mean?
It does have that weird
then there's like that church Southern Baptist hat.
Yeah, the crown
too.
Yeah.
The crown, and then again though, like I grew up at Pentecostal, right? And in Southern churches, there is that like culture of the decadent hat wearing.
Yeah.
Like that is a thing.
Yeah.
And that's also incorporated, I think, in the outfit.
Oh, fascinating.
You know what I mean?
So we have more of that kind of like religious iconography that's getting messed with. We have this sort of like exaggerated hips. So it's so funny because I look at this and I think like there's so many now I'm like I've walked into a quagmire because there are like images that this calls to mind, but it's sort of like there's a lot of danger in sort of calling them to mind because you think of like Sarah Bartman and the Hottentot Venus and like taking that look and like shoving it in your face.
And for reference, Hottentot Venus was a Black woman who was taken captive and basically showcased as like, I don't want to go over it in detail actually and make people relive I don't want to participate in trauma porn, but basically she was put on display and every part of her body was as like this sort of object for inquiry. There's plenty of stuff if you Google it, and it's kind of like one of the main touch points in Black feminist theory and research is about the way that these bodies have been commodified and objectified when it serves a sort of reproduction of sexual value, and it can be like very violating. It's like an ongoing cultural rape.
Yeah. So I don't know. What do you? I find myself like
hands.
Yeah.
Like from the Pink music video, which shout out to myself, I have a video on from way back, way back. I stand by my analysis of it being a trans-affirming music video, actually, because it redefined what we can call pussy. But sidebar, I think that there is like also a nod to that right?
Oh,
And
sure.
then the way that the gaze is totally shifted out of whack. Right. And then I also thought of like the kind of snuffleupaguses or like all of those kind of cartoon eyelashes.
Oh,
You know
yeah,
what I
there's some
mean?
super Muppety about
Yeah,
it.
yeah, exactly. What else did it make you think of?
What did it make me think of? Well, it made me think of the Venus of Willendorf.
I don't know
That
that.
it's like, here, let me cue this
Okay.
up. So these sort of old
Oh.
artifacts of,
Which are actually kind of like the statuesque version of the Venus Hottentot, right? Or
yeah,
Hottentot
except like
Venus.
way before the fact.
Yeah.
So we're talking about
Yeah.
many years BC, and then also we're talking about the fact that like these have nothing to do with Venus at all. So the whole idea of like the Venus figurine being ascribed to these ancient, what is this, 2800 BC, 28,000 BC. Is that right? Wow, that's a very long time ago. But anyway, this is sort of like ancient artifact that takes these features of the female body and just like extrapolates them to this like outrageous degree.
Yeah.
And then sort of white men discover them and they're like, oh, it's a Venus figure. And they like take this label that comes from this sort of like classical realm of Greek and Roman.
Hashtag rape culture.
Exactly. Yeah.
You're wondering how far back rape culture goes.
Yeah. They're like, because when was this figure discovered? Because it was discovered in 1908, and they discovered this figure in 1908, and they were like, oh, it's a Venus figure. And it predates any conception of like a Venus figure that we might have. And so it actually gets to something like really ancient and really sort of beyond the historiography that we've written.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I think,
and it's also like super 90s, early 2000s, and it's in like the most like slap in the face of current fashion possible, right? Because like everyone's wearing it again. We were shopping the other day, and we were like, those shoes are back, like the platform pool slides.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So there's obviously what I'm wearing, some parts of 90s culture that are awesome that they're back, but then there's this sort of like weird way that like in the 90s there was this kind of colorblind multicultural hip hop culture that became like commodified and mass circulated, and it leaned heavily on that type of schema, right? Like the way the lines are going, the kind of mismatched face parts, the hot pink with the black with the white, hammer time pants afterwards turning into a 90s thing, and like you know what I mean? So
this is an outfit that's both out of place and out of time.
Exactly.
And I think that might
camp.
Is that our fifth rule? Okay, so help me out here. Help me review our rules here. So we have.
You're asking the person who never remembers rules. Like their rules.
So camp has to break a rule.
Yeah.
It's not a noun, it's a verb. Camp has to be cheap. Camp has to be disgusting. And it has to be out of time and out of place. It has to be anachronistic, not belong to this time.
And I think that's why this worked at the Met Gala. Whereas some of the other outfits, like they would have been campy in a ballroom setting, but the Met Gala, they weren't out of place or out of time.
Yeah.
It simply passes at the Met Gala as an adventurous outfit take.
So real quick then, we should talk about
Lena Waithe.
Before that, just real quick.
Oh yeah,
Rihanna in 2018.
Yeah,
so
Rihanna's like one of the queens of camp.
So what did Rihanna wear in 2018? So this year the theme was camp. Last year the theme was heavenly bodies, Catholicism and the imagination. What was it called? It was called Heavenly Bodies, and the theme was Catholic art and the imagination. So Rihanna showed up basically dressed as like sexy Pope. Yeah, I think like sexy diamond-studded Pope. So out of time and out of place.
Even with the like ankle bracelet. You know what I mean? Like ankle bracelets are like a clincher, pun intended. Like, that's when you know that it's making fun of it.
Yeah.
You know what
Once
I mean?
you have the diamond anklet.
The diamond anklet, it's accessories. The diamond anklet with the like overkill necklace, but with the Pope hat. The Pope hat on its own would have been like, oh, camp, right away, right? Like that's what officially makes it camp for sure. Like this is a moment where she's performing Popeness and like poking at it. But the anklet with the mini skirt, with the necklace, is what
Yeah.
also puts it out of time.
Right. And the
out of
mini skirt,
place.
like it nails everything.
Yeah.
I don't know if it nails the cheap thing, but the anklet certainly makes it look cheap.
Depends on who you ask, though, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good
Because
point.
she's also kind of making fun of the fact that if she wears it, it's seen as cheapening the
Oh,
status of the Pope.
totally.
But
Because that regalia that the Pope
Mhm.
wears suddenly becomes cheap and tacky
So there's
once
also
you put
like
it.
a heavy call out.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like, cool, you can put that on like a middle-aged male European body, and it's like it's a celebration of wealth and religious devotion.
Yeah.
You put it on a young Black female body and it's cheapened.
So it's also a comment on racism.
Yeah,
Most
absolutely.
like basic, blunt way.
Yeah.
Right? And not basic in a bad way, but like you can't miss it.
Yeah.
You know? So Lena Waits, shall we do it?
Yeah, so
Let's dive into the quagmire.
So you talk to me about this, because I don't know who Lena Waite is. I don't know much about the outfit. So talk to me.
So I don't actually know a deep dive. I should know. I know her as just like the super hot queer person that shows up on my Instagram all the time saying cool things. Like, you're a cool celebrity. That's about the like extent of my real knowledge. But I know that they were on the committee and part of like the council that decided on the theme for the year, and that they showed up in what is arguably one of the least campy outfits, right? Because it's just a silk suit.
Mm-hmm.
You could get away with that at pretty much any big fashion thing. And as like a genderqueer, person, it would be called that, right?
Yeah.
Besides maybe the shoulders. The shoulders are maybe like punching it out a little bit. But like on the back, it just said Black drag queens invent camp, right? And there is like, you can find plenty of articles where people close read basically what that end on the invented did.
Mm-hmm.
It's supposed to be like playing with the concept of camp by reenacting it through an exaggerated linguistics, right? And also kind of like saying, and that was the end of camp as we know it, because now it's here at the Met Gala. It was sort of seen as like a comment on the fact that now that it's become the like thing that the wealthiest and most famous and affluent and predominantly white celebrities can perform at will, it might not be able to be camp at that point anymore. So I think that there's some intention in refusing to do full-on camp then in that moment as well, right? But then, so this is where things get like dicier. Then the internet exploded, because it's the internet. And what was really interesting to me is that you do a quick search on this and you will find two sets of articles, right? You'll find a whitewashed history of camp, where it's basically like it started in like gay male culture at the end of the 19th century, and then like Oscar Wilde popularized it, and then it was blah 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 blah, and then people accepted gayness, so does camp exist anymore? I don't know, right? And then usually the Susan Sontag essay is like plugged in as towards the end of camp. Yeah. The other story you'll find of camp is like Black drag queens invented camp and white people just stole it. Right. And it's been, I think there was one quote which said, it's been part of Black culture throughout all of the ages. Now, first of all, I cannot speak to Black culture throughout all of the ages because I'm not a scholar in that. It's not something I'm part of, etc. But what was interesting to me is it was these two extreme dichotomies, and neither of them were really talking about how they're co-articulated, and all of them were treating camp as an object. Like it's a thing people did in this setting. Yeah. And stop. But if you look at the rules we just made for camp, it is actually an orientation, and that orientation depends a lot on your danger in different social contexts, right? Yeah. So for like gay men, for instance, in the early 1900s to be doing this and have their ball, and they did have ball culture, that was a thing then as well, right? That was very dangerous. It was illegal. You could be like raped, imprisoned, or killed. There was an attempt to outlaw it. Like it was actually a very dangerous thing to be doing because it was calling out and making subversive all of these reproductive and property-based norms around class and sexuality and family, right? And similarly, you can find in non-white communities forms of ball culture that emerged that also poke at whiteness for the same reasons. And it has to do with an orientation towards danger. Importantly, what a lot of the like kind of New York Times style histories ignored are like Paris is Burning, right? Which is a really famous documentary on ball culture in New York. Yeah. And a lot of it is about like Black drag queens and the work that they did to kind of subvert a lot of the gentrification that they saw happening in the urban centers. It's also really, really common in cultural studies to read like the basic criticism of Susan Sontag. Like everyone understands that, and there's one article that kind of touched on it this way, that Susan Sontag maybe doesn't pay as much due to queer nightlife and queer life as like comprising camp as like would have been salient for the time period.
Well, and she wrote it in 1962. So like it's worth noting that queer nightlife
was
existed in a way that was like very likely like maybe impossible for Susan Sontag to access and to speak about.
Exactly.
This is not an excuse, but she may not have even known the richness there, because I certainly don't know the richness there.
Yeah.
So I don't know what queer nightlife was like in 1962.
I mean, the 60s is when you started having all of the bigger queer and Black civil rights movements burgeoning, right? So you have
in the late 60s though, like 62 though.
62 is when Silent Spring was about to come out, Audre Lorde was starting to publish, and Langston Hughes was coming out. Like all of these writers became famous in the late 60s, but they were publishing and being vocal in the early 60s.
Yeah, but as far as the gay rights movement went pre-Stonewall, it was all about the homophile movement and all about like, look at how much like straight people we are.
But I will say in the early 60s, a lot of the Black gay culture was already doing that. And that's part of what the critique is it's like they were actually vocal before a lot more like white-based gay movements were.
Okay.
And so that's why a lot of people are also angry about documentations of Stonewall, because they're like, well, it doesn't account for the fact that many like Black trans women, especially or queer trans people of color, were at the forefront of this before white gay communities were able to start speaking out and did. And I think a lot of that, again, has to do with proximity to danger, right? So if you can pass as a straight white person and that keeps you safe, there's more to lose if you're going to be vocally coming out. But if your position as like a Black person or brown person in the early 60s is already precarious, there's a lot less to lose. For also, you're never seen as properly heteronormative in that period, right? And this is where like cultural studies goes deep. So I'm going to just touch on it, and people can like comment or ask for more articles because there's a plethora of them from the 80s. But basically, like, there's a lot of studies now, and the reason people talk about gender, sex, race being co-articulated is because they're rooted in reproductive property rights. And if in the early 60s you had a lineage in the US where you did not have access to reproductive property rights and were never seen as like properly male or female, Hot Venus is a prime example, being out didn't have the same type of weight as being a white person who was out. And that's where I think that proximity to danger becomes really important, right? Because these are things where camp existed across these different spaces. I don't think you can reduce it to Black drag queens invented camp. I don't agree with that. I don't think it was invented, first of all. And second of all, like, I think that, again, if it's an orientation, it's probably existed in all cultures in some form across time, blah, 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 blah. I just don't think that that's a statement you can safely make. But I think the statement that is being made, which is like, what does it mean when you become so safe culturally that other versions of camp are still not safe, but camp is seen as still making you safe? Like in some ways you start erasing all of the different violences that are still ongoing, or the ball cultures that maybe don't show up on Netflix. You know what I mean? Or can't get recirculated. So I think what's interesting is that it first of all, what depressed me about it in like a huge way, because fascism, as always, is that it was so binaristic. Everyone was like, Black culture, and it was stolen, or white culture, and Black people did it too, right? And it's actually not that simple, right? Like this is something that anytime a marginalized community that's predominantly queer, actually you could argue is the real coalitional tie piece there, has been like the endangered population. And as long as there's been ballroom cultures, there's been camp, right? And your position to it has had to shift necessarily through different periods. So it's not to say, for instance, that in the 60s, it was safe for white men to be gay, or for white, it was not at all. Like that culture was so underground. I don't think folks younger than us even, and we're pretty young, so that's saying something, can quite comprehend it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I do think that what this could, hopefully, if I'm not just going with like what it did already, what it could do is force a better conversation about how these different histories that are binaristically separated are actually very much intertwined and interdependent on each other for meaning. And because they're a verb, like because they're orientations and like ways of being and going around. And it's not this like object that you can place here. It's not black. It's not white. It's not brown. It's not gay. It's not straight. It's about a sort of way of perceiving culture, you know, and your position in relation to it, and danger. Right. And then if we go back over the 5 rules, that's going to shift based on where you're positioned in society. And if you're at the Met Gala, how campy can it be?
Like what sort of, I guess the only danger that a lot of these people are facing is like the danger of like the backlash of their following. So in some way, like, making a divisive statement through your outfit is like one like way of camping the red carpet.
Exactly.
So I don't know, I have many thoughts about invented. Like that's super interesting to me.
Do it.
Because
I just went on like a long rant, so now you guys.
I think we're running out of time, but okay. I think invented includes both the beginning and the end, right? Because it's got the invention and it's got the ending. And it also is a word that looks misspelled when you first see it. And I think that's on purpose to sort of poke at the tendency to see sort of like Black queer communities as like uneducated and incapable of spelling. But it's
like a giant middle finger.
Yeah. But the fact that it's invented, I don't know, because it is. You sprung this on me before we started filming.
Sorry.
I hadn't seen this image before. Because it makes me wonder, like did they are they saying that Black drag queens invented it, or that they invented the ending of it? Because I don't think it has a beginning, but does it have an ending?
I mean, it might be just totally dismantling the concept of creating or inventing anything that's cultural, right? Because you could also argue that, like, because race, gender, and sex are so intertwined under respectability politics, essentially, right? Over who can reproduce, make a family, and own property, and stop, right? That, like, even when it wasn't necessarily, like, in the early 1900s, people of color in those ballroom spaces, it was dependent on the constant erasure of gender and sex in Black spaces, right? Like, they are still intertwined. And I like that it says invented, partly because it's not claiming it invented it. There's something else that's happening linguistically there that's really tricky and is a lot more like circular in its time space. It's not willing to say it started here, it ended here.
And I think that's more than anything what's going on here, is that it's pointing to the circularity of the history, or at least the convolution of the history, and how we can't look at camp and say, oh, it started here, but it was sort of articulated by Susan Sontag here, and it's evolved into like this set of rules that we have. So like part of me is really willing to take the 5 rules and just throw them out altogether, because
it's like Fight Club, right? Like the first rule of Fight Club, you can't talk about Fight Club.
Well, I think like the camp is always having to end itself and always having to invent itself, because what is campy in one situation becomes, it doesn't have camp disgust, it's just disgusting. You know, and it's not camp dangerous, it's just dangerous, or it's too safe. So camp has to constantly reinvent itself. And what I think we're looking at here when we're looking at the Met Gala is we aren't looking at sort of the death of camp or the ruining of camp. All we're looking at is a moment for camp having to reinvent itself. The people on the red carpet did not reinvent camp, but they are calling for everyone who's not on that red carpet to reinvent camp.
And it has to now.
Now it has to.
Right? Which in some ways is like kind of depressing in its own way, right? Like it's exciting. Like there's always hope in having to like acknowledge that cultural formations are always in flux. They're never static. Like every second it's different relationships forming, right? And how we're orienting ourselves. But then there's the like, it feels like as marginalized folks that sometimes just when you start to sit comfortably in something, it's no longer that thing because someone's making a lot of money off of it. and you're not.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, like, all of the folks in Paris are burning died prematurely, oftentimes very violent deaths due to the fact that they were in ball culture performing camp. And yet you have the Met Gala where people are getting paid stupid amounts of money to be in camp without saying that. You know, and that's when it's just like, oh man. You know?
And so our responsibility as queer people that aren't on the red carpet this year. This year.
I mean, you know, we might go viral, Patrick. And suddenly, like, teachers will be invited to that gala.
But our responsibility is to acknowledge, like, yes, this is really troubling what happened on the red carpet this year. It's upsetting, but we also have to, like, rise to the demand, like, okay, now we reinvent it, now we re-articulate it, now we try to understand this all over again, because as it turns out, all of the danger and disgust and cheapness that we thought defined camp isn't part of the rule anymore. So what are the new rules?
Or different things now function in those spaces than before.
But we get to redefine camp because we have to.
Yeah.
So that's our responsibility as the people that didn't make it onto the red carpet.
Yeah.
Cool.
You could have argued, okay, I'm gonna do one more call out on what people on the red carpet could have done.
What could they have done?
There could have been more direct acknowledgement of the lives lost for embracing camp. You know, I think that's possible. I think there's a way of saying, like, wait a minute, like, how can we honor and acknowledge the fact that there are people who died because of this aesthetic, and, like, we are now making money off of it. There has to be a way. And I don't know the answer for that, but I think that's also, like, a hopeful thing. It's not like an abstract concept.
Yeah.
It's like there has to be a way to both celebrate and appreciate these different cultural formations.
Yeah.
While also, like, acknowledging and learning from the violence that was enacted through them.
Yeah.
Like, where is camp happening now where people are endangered? But because it's not Met Gala like styled camp, are we not learning from that history and doing something different?
So I'll be interested to know what the Camp Notes on Fashion exhibit actually is.
Yeah.
Because every Met Gala is in fact like a fundraiser for the costume department of the Met. So it comes with this accompanying exhibit that the art museum puts on. And so I have to wonder what that will look like. Yeah. Because these exhibits are so often organized linearly and historically, and we've just sort of said that, like, oh, it's really hard to do that, or at least it's hard to, like, pin down camp at all. So yeah, I'll be curious to see what happens and to see what the end point of the exhibit looks like.
Can I be really woo real quick for our wrap up?
Please do.
Sorry, that would have been part of the campy gesture. Given the general
and then like
today's
like my sequined bleeding heart. It's all right.
So to be really cheesy, so sorry to do this to you now, but of course the, like, kind of general sensibility of the poetry vlog is that hope is a call to action. Like, if you have a feeling of hope, then you're also feeling a sort of spurring towards doing something. Like, it's like, oh, I don't feel, like, trapped or static anymore. There are, like, directions that can be followed, right? Or directions you can go. It doesn't have to be one, but it can be this kind of, like, I'm no longer feeling trapped by depression. I'm no longer feeling trapped by a sense of hopelessness. Like, hope is like a sort of, like, oh, there might be a way to, like, do something that's different or new.
I like that. Right? Less an idea like, oh, maybe something good will happen. Like, that's not
actually very hopeful.
Yeah.
That's, like, very, very placid.
Yeah.
It's kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas I think that, like, what hope, when it's real, is you see something. Like, for me, it was the Janelle Monáe outfit. Right? And the reason you have hope has to be because the thing before wasn't giving you hope. So it's always based in some other criticism. Right? Because you wouldn't feel a compulsion or hope towards this other thing if you were dissatisfied with the one thing. Sure. Right? So it's actually, like, a very involved research methodology. Sorry, y'all, you're getting trapped. like, you have to have, like, a rock solid discontent to have a need for hope. And if you have hope,
yeah, no, you're so right. Oh, fuck.
You know what I mean? And so, like, but then if you have hope, it's because you see that there's a something else And I think that this is where camp and poetry intersect, right? Because poetry, when it's really good, also refuses to kind of settle into a single meaning that you can analyze, say, okay, I'm dissatisfied with now, discard it, right? So I think that there's like a sort of poetics as a way of living, as a campy way of living, potentially, camp being one like version of it, but both of them being oriented towards a sort of hopefulness. It's a critique, like we are dissatisfied with this thing and the violence it's created. Yeah. But this dissatisfaction makes me think there has to be something else, and that gives me hope. Rad. You know, and then finding those other things to act on. Yeah. Yeah, right. Oh. So that way it's a little less of a like flat, depressed ending of like, who knows? But like, I think that like that's part of why this was such an exciting intervention on the carpet too, right? Is because there was that like, oh, there has to be something else. I don't think that the binaristic articles that came out of it were the something else per se. No. But I have decent enough faith in people's reading capacities to say that it signals that there is some hope for something else, or people wouldn't bother. Yeah. You know? Oh, I liked that last note. Okay, good. I was like, I feel like you're never going to like recording me again. That was good. That's what I wanted. Get to Ruth. All right. Where are we at? Oh, wow. We're alone. We're talking for a while. All by ourselves. We should do our sign off anyway. Okay. Who's Thanks for... Now we can say whatever we want. I know. Okay. Kind of. I mean, I already kind of wanted. All right. Let's say that's bye. When no one's watching. So, can I tell your big news real quick? To no one. Yeah, absolutely. So before we sign off, speaking of hope, I was feeling hopeless about the job market. Not as hopeless as I was, I guarantee it. Patrick got a job. We got a job. Yep, got a tenure track job. 3-3 teaching load, which y'all don't know what that means, but it means doable teaching load for a doable salary, and it's staying in Seattle. So you're going to see Patrick more on the poetry blog next year. Is my selfish spiel about it. I think I like lost it on behalf of it. When you I like told him, Patrick got a job. Good job. So my call for comments today is this put up on YouTube is congratulate Patrick. That's really it. Because like, why not? And now that we're alone on here, oh, we aren't. Someone else joined us. Sorry, whoever it is. We're wrapping up. Yeah, thanks for joining us at the very end. I was just saying as our sign off that Patrick got an amazing job, which is very difficult to do your first year on the job market in our field. Like statistically, it doesn't happen. So like, yeah. Thank you. Couldn't have done it without you. It's not true. No, like in the most practical sense, like you drove me to the interview. Could have taken a lift. But you know what? I'm working on it. We are acknowledging our interdependence, which is not the same as codependence. All right. On that note, remember to visit thepoetryblog.com for all of your goods, right? Instagram, Twitter, all of the videos are loaded there. Links to all of the podcast platforms are there. And if you're looking to get involved, there's links to that as well. This is going to go up pretty quickly. So if you're watching this one and it's not July yet, it's going to go on hiatus throughout all of June, and we'll be back with a whole new season in July. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, because production's slowing down, it's a good time to catch up on all the old episodes. Patrick also has an Instagram now, which I will take credit for. Actually, I have no problem with that. Couldn't have done it without you. Now he has an app. So if you're like, I really dug everything Patrick was saying, and man, he's a cute person, right? Just go to patrick.million and check him out. Cool. All right. Thanks for doing this, Patrick. My pleasure, as always. This is way too fun. Yeah, it's really good. All right. Thank you. Bye.